The room went silent the moment my sister held up the shiny new keys. Her smile stretched wide like she'd just conquered the world. Everyone clapped. My parents' faces glowed with pride, their hands squeezing hers as if they'd built that dream house brick by brick. But me? I stood frozen, glass of champagne trembling in my hand, because I knew exactly where those keys had come from. My $60,000 wedding fund. The fund I had built through years of extra shifts, sleepless nights, and relentless saving. The money I'd trusted my parents to hold on to safely until the day I said my vows. And now it was gone, handed over like some prize to my sister, the family's golden child. I watched her toss her hair back, basking in the attention, while my mother leaned close and whispered loud enough for me to hear, "Don't make a scene. Be happy for her. Don't be selfish. That word slammed into me harder than any betrayal. They thought I'd stay quiet. They thought I'd break. But as I stood there, humiliated, one thought blazed in my mind. They had no idea what was coming. Cooking had always been my language. Where others used words, I used flavors. A perfectly balanced stew could say, "I love you," better than any sentence. A flaky pie crust, golden and warm, could comfort someone far more than a hug. I grew up in a household where food was everything. Family dinners were sacred, recipes passed down through generations, whispers of tradition that lived in every dish. I spent countless hours in the kitchen, not because anyone told me to, but because it felt like home. The smell of simmering broth, the rhythm of chopping vegetables, the hiss of oil meeting garlic. It was where I felt most myself. But in that same kitchen, I also learned something else. Favoritism. My sister Clara had always been the golden child. She was praised for achievements, even when they weren't hers. If she baked a batch of cookies using my recipe, Mom would gush, "Clara, you're so talented." If I stayed up late perfecting a bread recipe, Dad would brush past me with a mutter, "Why waste time on that?" It wasn't that Clara loved cooking. In fact, she didn't. She loved attention. And in our family, attention was currency. I gave more, quietly, while she took more, loudly. It became our pattern. I still remember the first sting. The moment I realized this wasn't just sibling rivalry, it was theft. I was 15, and I had spent weeks testing a chocolate cake recipe, experimenting with ratios, until I created something soft, rich, and unforgettable. The night I finally nailed it, Clara swooped in. She baked it for a school fundraiser, slapped her name on it, and won an award for Best Homemade Dessert. Everyone applauded. I stood there, smiling weakly, my throat burning. Clara whispered in my ear as she accepted her ribbon. "Don't worry. You're the brains. I'm the face. We make a good team." That was my first lesson in how she saw me. Not as a sister, but as a resource. Still, I kept cooking, kept creating. My notebooks filled with scribbled ideas, oil stains, and little notes about how to improve flavor. Each recipe was a piece of me, my way of honoring my grandmother's teachings and carving out something of my own. The symbolic object in my story? My grandmother's recipe box. A weathered wooden box with brass hinges, filled with handwritten cards. It sat on the counter like a relic, and to me, it was sacred. When I was a child, she told me, "These recipes aren't just food. They're memory. They're survival. Protect them, and they'll protect you." I took her words seriously. Clara didn't. She would flip through the cards without reverence, copying things down only when she thought she could use them for praise. As I got older, I started to distance myself. I poured my energy into refining my craft, while Clara poured hers into shining at family gatherings. But no matter how much I tried to step out of her shadow, my parents' favoritism kept pulling me back. The humiliation only grew. One Thanksgiving, Clara burned the stuffing, blackened, bitter, practically inedible. Yet Mom waved it off, chuckling, "At least she tried." Later that same night, my perfectly roasted turkey was dismissed with a shrug. Dad said, "Of course it turned out well. You had nothing else to do all week." I smiled politely, but inside, a quiet anger built. It wasn't just the lack of credit, it was the rewriting of truth. That anger grew stronger the more they dismissed me, until eventually I began saving things. Proof, evidence, a notebook here, a photo there, little pieces of reality that no one could deny later. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just about recipes. It was about respect. And one day, I would need to prove that what was mine was mine. Foreshadowing of bigger conflict came at a cousin's birthday party. Clara presented a family-famous lasagna, beaming while everyone praised her. I watched as she took a bow, as though she had built the recipe from scratch. When someone asked how she came up with it, Clara smirked and said, "Oh, I just have a natural gift." That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to stop. Clara wasn't just borrowing from me. She was building an entire identity on my back. And my parents? They were her biggest cheerleaders. Narrator voice, steady but cutting. They thought I would stay silent forever. But even the quietest flame can turn into a wildfire. The weeks after the birthday party only proved what I had feared. Clara wasn't stopping. If anything, she was getting bolder. Recipes I had worked on for months, my lemon tart with a hint of rosemary, my chili with slow-roasted peppers, even my grandmother's handwritten cornbread recipe, started appearing at family gatherings, all under Clara's name. She would toss her hair, smile sweetly, and say things like, "I don't know, I just have this knack for combining flavors." Some people are born with it, I guess. And people believed her. Or maybe, like with everything else, they found it easier to believe. At first, I tried to ignore it. Tried to tell myself, it's just food. Don't make it bigger than it is. But late at night, lying in bed, I could feel the anger coiling inside me. Cooking wasn't just food to me. It was my soul on a plate, and she was stealing it. The first escalation came quietly. One afternoon, Clara showed up at my apartment unannounced. She wandered into my kitchen like she owned the place, trailing her fingers along the counter. "Still scribbling in that old notebook?" she asked, spotting it near the stove. I grabbed it before she could touch it. "It's mine, Clara." She smirked. "Relax. I was just curious. Don't be so defensive." But the way her eyes lingered on that notebook told me everything. She wanted it. Soon after, I noticed her trying to smear me. It started with little comments, dropped into conversations like poison. At a family dinner, she sighed and told my aunt, "She's so obsessed with cooking, it's like unhealthy, you know. She doesn't have balance in her life." At church, she whispered to a friend of my mom's, "Sometimes I think she makes things up. Like, I don't think she really came up with all those recipes." Suddenly, people started looking at me differently. Sideways glances, raised eyebrows, whispers I wasn't meant to hear. The isolation crept in slowly, but relentlessly. At work, a coworker teased, "Hey, did you really spend your whole weekend baking again?" "No wonder you don't have a social life at a family barbecue," Uncle George said with a chuckle. "Don't be so sensitive. It's just food. Your sister's the one with the real future ahead." Each word cut deeper than the last. I stopped sleeping well. My nights were restless, filled with tossing and turning, my body buzzing with anger I couldn't turn off. My chest felt heavy, like I was carrying a stone that no one else could see. Even my hands shook sometimes when I cooked, not from nerves, but from exhaustion. And still, Clara thrived. She was getting invited to church potlucks, local events, even asked to share her cooking tips at a neighbor's gathering. Every time she used my recipes. One evening, after another family dinner where she basked in applause for a dish she had stolen from me, I found myself gripping my grandmother's recipe box, my knuckles white. Her words echoed in my head. Protect them, and they'll protect you. But how? That was when the unexpected happened. At a small community event, where Clara once again paraded one of my desserts, a quiet voice broke through the chatter. It was Lena, an old friend from high school who had become a food blogger. She tasted the dessert, raised her eyebrows, and said, "This is good, but funny. It tastes exactly like something I had at your apartment years ago." The words hung in the air like smoke. Clara laughed nervously, trying to wave it off. But Lena's eyes met mine. There was something in her gaze, recognition, maybe even solidarity. Later that night, she found me in the parking lot. "I don't know what's going on," she said softly, "but if you need someone to talk to, I'm here." It was the first time in weeks I felt seen. The first time someone had questioned Clara's lies. Driving home, my hands gripping the wheel, I realized something. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. Narrator voice, steady, with a quiet edge of defiance. That was the first time someone reminded me I wasn't alone. And once I knew that, the storm began to shift. For a while, I thought maybe Clara would back off. That maybe Lena's comment at the community event had planted enough doubt to slow her down. I was wrong. Clara didn't retreat. She doubled down. It began with whispers about a cookbook. A neighbor mentioned it offhand one afternoon, flipping through a magazine. "Your sister's working on something big, isn't she?" "A recipe book? Heard your parents are really proud." My stomach dropped. A cookbook? Using my recipes? When I asked Clara directly, she just smiled like a cat who'd cornered a bird. "Don't be so paranoid," she said. "I'm just organizing some of my favorites." You should be flattered, but then came the dinner. We were all gathered around the table, the air thick with the smell of roast chicken and garlic bread. My parents looked unusually cheerful, exchanging secret smiles. And then, like they'd been rehearsing for weeks, they unveiled it. A mock-up cover. Glossy, bright, with Clara's face beaming up at us. The title read, "Homemade with Love. Recipes by Clara." My recipes, my life's work, all neatly packaged under her name. The room erupted in applause. My mom's eyes shone with tears as she declared, "We always knew Clara was destined for something special." Dad patted her hand proudly, like he was the architect of this triumph. "And Clara?" She leaned back in her chair, her smug smile aimed right at me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My fork clattered against the plate as I whispered, Those are mine." Silence. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Dad's voice cut through, sharp as glass. "Don't start." Mom shook her head, her face hardening. "Why can't you just be happy for your sister for once?" And Clara, with her perfect act, added, "I tried to include you. I wanted to give you credit, but you've been so difficult. So maybe it's better this way." The gaslighting was unbearable. It wasn't just theft anymore. It was a full-on erasure of me. That night, I sat on my bed staring at my recipe notebook like it was both a lifeline and a death sentence. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. Stains of olive oil, notes in the margins, crossed out lines where I'd perfected a flavor. They were mine. Proof of every hour, every experiment, every creation. And I realized Clara wasn't just stealing recipes. She was using authority. Backed by my parents, she was rewriting the story, painting herself as the genius and me as the bitter, jealous sister. If I stayed quiet, I'd be erased. I almost broke then. Almost believed their version of reality. Almost let the exhaustion drown me. But then Lena called. She'd seen the mock-up online. Clara had posted it, fishing for likes. "I don't know the whole story," Lena said carefully, "but I do know you." and I know you're cooking. If she's trying to take this public, you need to protect yourself." Her words snapped me back into focus. Protect myself. So I did. The next morning, I walked into a lawyer's office with my recipe notebook clutched to my chest. The lawyer flipped through the pages slowly, nodding. "These are original works," she said firmly. "You've got timestamps, notes, physical evidence. If she tries to publish without your consent, you have a case. A case. Not just family drama, not just whispers. A real, legal case." When I left that office, sunlight spilling across the pavement, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Power. Narrator voice, calm but sharp. They thought I was cornered. They thought their authority would silence me. But what they didn't realize was simple. Control can be stolen. Proof cannot. And Clara? She had no idea what was coming. Cliffhanger line. She thought she could steal my recipes and silence my voice. But the storm she unleashed was about to break her world wide open. The days after the cookbook reveal blurred into something surreal. At first, I thought maybe the lawyer's reassurance would keep me steady, but Clara wasn't slowing down. She was accelerating. The mock-up spread like wildfire on social media. Neighbors congratulated her. Local bloggers shared her post. Soon, she was invited to speak at a small community food fair. Everywhere I turned, Clara's name was attached to my recipes. And my parents? They weren't just bystanders. They were co-conspirators. Mom went around telling relatives how proud she was. "Our Clara always had the magic touch," she said, glossing over every moment I'd slaved in the kitchen. Dad chimed in about how this cookbook will put our family name on the map. It was more than betrayal. It was a rewrite of history. And the more they repeated it, the more people believed it. Whispers turned into raised eyebrows. Neighbors who once praised my cooking now said things like, "Well, Clara must have learned it all from you, right? She just perfected it?" Perfected. The word stung like acid. At the grocery store, I overheard 2 women at the checkout. They say her sister's jealous. Doesn't want to share the spotlight. Typical, isn't it? There's always one who can't stand another's success. That was me now. Painted as the bitter villain in Clara's rags to riches story. Clara had created flying monkeys, little messengers who carried her version of events and repeated them until it felt like truth. And I was becoming invisible. But invisibility has its advantages. You can watch. You can plan. You can wait for the perfect moment. Lena saw it happening too. She pulled me aside after one particularly humiliating encounter at the farmer's market, where Clara accidentally introduced me as her assistant. "You can't let this go on," she whispered, her eyes blazing. "She's not just taking your recipes. She's taking your identity." She was right. So I shifted gears. Instead of confronting Clara head-on, which only made me look unstable, I started documenting. Every recipe, every notebook page, every photo of me cooking, testing, plating. Emails where Clara asked me to send over that stew recipe real quick. Text messages where she gushed about my talent before deciding to brand it as her own. Evidence, a trail that couldn't be erased. Meanwhile, Clara grew bolder. She hired a photographer for her so-called professional shots. She hosted dinners where she cooked, badly, yet beamed with pride as everyone politely chewed. And when the dishes flopped, she blamed me. "Oh, my sister's been so moody lately," she told a guest. "She keeps giving me the wrong measurements, sabotaging me." The audacity made my blood boil. But instead of exploding, I smiled. Because every lie she told became another thread in the noose she was quietly weaving for herself. Then came the announcement. A local publisher had shown interest. They wanted to fast-track Clara's cookbook for the holiday season. The family celebrated like they'd won the lottery. Clara strutted around the living room, holding the email like a golden ticket. Mom opened champagne. Dad toasted our future. And me? I sat quietly, notebook on my lap, recording every word, because I knew something they didn't. Legally, a storm was already brewing. The lawyer had filed a cease and desist letter warning the publisher that the recipes were not Clara's intellectual property. They hadn't received it yet. But they would, and when they did, Clara's little empire would crumble. Narrator voice, low and steady. She built her kingdom on stolen ground. And the higher she climbed, the farther she'd fall. Cliffhanger line. The celebration had barely ended when the first crack split through her dream, and it was only the beginning. The champagne glasses still sat on the counter when the email arrived. At first, Clara thought it was good news. She opened it on her phone, her face expectant, glowing with triumph. But as her eyes moved across the screen, the smile faltered. What is this?" she whispered. Dad leaned over her shoulder, his brows furrowed. "Cease and desist?" The room froze. Mom set down her glass so fast it tipped, fizz spilling across the table. "What do they mean by unauthorized use of intellectual property?" My heart thudded in my chest. I already knew. I had been waiting for this moment. The publisher had received my lawyer's letter. The recipes were officially contested. Clara's deal was on hold. Clara's hands shook as she read aloud. Evidence provided demonstrates prior authorship and original ownership of the recipes in question. Silence. Thick. Heavy. Then she snapped her head toward me. "You did this!" Her voice dripped venom, loud enough to rattle the picture frames on the wall. I didn't flinch. For the first time, I didn't have to. "Yes," I said calmly. "I did." Mom's face crumpled in disbelief. "How could you betray your own family like this?" The laugh that bubbled in my throat wasn't bitter. It was sharp, controlled. Betrayal? I spent years pouring myself into these recipes. She stole them, and you cheered her on. That's betrayal. Clara slammed her phone down on the table. "You don't get it. This was my chance. Our chance. And you ruined it." I leaned forward, my voice steady, every syllable like a stone dropping into water. "No, Clara. You ruined it the moment you decided my work was yours to take." Her face twisted, but I didn't stop. I pulled a folder from my bag and laid it flat on the table. One by one, I slid out copies, photographs of me cooking, date-stamped years before Clara ever claimed a recipe. Emails with her begging for just one more dish to add to her collection. Screenshots where she admitted she couldn't replicate my results. Each piece landed like a hammer blow. Dad opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Mom's hand trembled as she reached for the papers, then stopped short. Clara's confidence drained from her face, leaving only raw panic. This doesn't prove anything," she stammered. My lawyer's letter, neatly folded on top, said otherwise. I looked around the room, my voice calm but unshakable. "You tried to erase me, to make me small, but I don't need your approval anymore. What I need is respect, and from now on, I'll take nothing less." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the fizzing champagne bottle hissed like a mocking reminder of their premature victory. Clara broke first. She shoved the papers away, her face blotchy, tears threatening. "This isn't fair. You've always had everything." "No," I cut in, my tone razor sharp. "I've had work. I've had sacrifice. You've had excuses. And tonight, they ran out." Dad pushed back from the table, his jaw tight. He looked at me as though seeing me for the first time. "You planned this." I met his stare. "No. You planned to take from me. I simply refused to let you succeed." The room seemed smaller, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves were listening. For the first time in years, I felt taller. Not because they shrank, but because I finally stood at my full height. Narrator voice, measured and final. They thought cornering me would keep me silent, but the truth has a way of echoing louder than lies. I gathered my folder, tucking it under my arm. As I turned for the door, I left them with one last line, quiet, resolute. I don't want apologies. I want change. And then I walked out, the sound of my footsteps steady, unshaken, carrying me into something new. Cliffhanger. Behind me, the cracks in their empire widened, and ahead of me, a future I could finally claim was waiting. The cookbook lie collapsed, leaving my sister exposed and my parents silent. I walked away, not with bitterness, but with freedom. The stolen recipes no longer chained me. They became proof of my resilience. I built my own path, my own table, surrounded by people who valued truth. For the first time, I felt unshakably whole. Narrator voice, calm but piercing. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe someone you trusted took what was yours, your ideas, your effort, your dreams, and tried to pass it off as their own. It hurts. It cuts deeper than most people realize. But here's the truth. Their theft doesn't define your worth. You do. I fought for my voice, and in doing so, I found strength I didn't know I had. So now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been betrayed by favoritism, theft, or someone trying to silence your work? How did you rise above it? Share your story in the comments. Let this be more than just my voice. Let it be a chorus of resilience. Because worth isn't something they hand you. It's something you claim and you protect and you never let go. Ever